Sisters and brothers, are reading from the Holy Gospel according to Saint Matthew.
Glory to you, O Lord.
And Jesus again in reply spoke to the chief priests and the elders of the people in parables, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He dispatched his servants to summon those invited guests to the feast, but they refused to come. A second time he sent other servants, saying, Tell those invited, Behold, I have prepared my banquet, my calves and fattened cattle are killed, and everything is ready. Come to my feast. Some ignored the invitation and went away, one to his farm, another to his business. The rest laid hold of his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged and sent his troops, destroyed those murderers, and burned their city. Then the king said to his servants, The feast is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy to come. Go out, therefore, into the main streets and invite to the feast whomever you will find. The servants went out into the streets and gathered all they found, bad and good alike, and the hall was filled with the guests. But when the king came in to meet the guests, he saw a man not dressed into the wedding garment. And he said to him, My friend, how is it that you come here without a wedding garment? But he was reduced to silence. Then the king said to his attendants, Bind his hands and feet and cast him into the darkness outside, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. Many are invited, but few are chosen. My sisters and brothers, the good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good morning, my sisters and brothers. Our gospel reading for today, my sisters and brothers, is basically a reaction of Jesus to the religious leaders during his time, the Pharisees and the scribes, and also to the Jewish people who are in a way not listening to him or rejecting the good news that Jesus was actually bringing to all of them. Somehow, my sisters and brothers, I guess it is also good to recognize that in the end, when the Lord will come to us to allow us to experience His loving presence or the banquet of God's goodness, it is always in the context of very personal. There is always an invitation, and the invitation will always be an initiative by God. When we look at our own life right now, we recognize that we are not worthy of God's loving presence or even God's forgiveness. And yet, it is the initiative of God to invite us to enjoy the fullness of life. This is Him. This is the meaning of God's generosity, that there's an invitation. But usually the invitation is very personal. It will begin with a certain private invitation to all of us, but at the same time, in the end, we realize that everything or everybody will always be invited. This is basically the story of our gospel reading for the day, when we realize that the Lord is in disgust or in pain or frustrated, but you will never see it. And so He decided to bring it into that story or parable that we have here right now, that there is this king who decided to host a great feast for his son, and there's an invitation. Unfortunately, in the end, many people or those who were invited said no to the king's invitation, and because of this, the king was enraged and decided to destroy their city. Somehow, such realization that the king, who at the very beginning are was in a way very generous, suddenly destroyed the city, is actually can also be interpreted according to Matthew that when the Jerusalem was totally destroyed, no, it was actually in 70 AD, that it was actually a realization that the Lord is actually punishing them because they were invited. They were actually the first invited guests. The Jewish people, the Israelites people, are the first invited guests. The invitation is very personal, but unfortunately they turned it down. And so the invitation in the end was open was open to everyone. And so the Gentiles were allowed also to experience God's loving presence. Now, what is the point of our gospel reading for today? My sisters and brothers, the message is very clear. First of all, God is very generous. We are always blessed. We receive so many blessings or graces from Him. The invitation to come to Him and to experience His loving presence comes from Him. This is a generous God. We don't deserve such invitation to enjoy eternal life, but God is actually inviting us. But the problem lies in us because we do not know our own priority, as it was written in our gospel reading for today. They said no. They realized, or those who are invited said no to the invitation of God because they prioritize less important things in their own life. The problem lies in us because in the end, my sisters and brothers, we recognize that our own daily routine every day, in a way, is the greatest temptation not to follow the Lord. Minsan ganyan naman, di ba? Sisters and brothers, we have received so many invitations, or we can feel every day that every now and then, in our own prayer or in our own silence, we can feel that God is inviting us to experience His love, to experience His peace, to experience His joy. But unfortunately, sometimes our own tendency is busy pa ako eh. Saka na lang yan, tatapusin ko muna itong mga ginagawa ko sa ngayon. No? Bago na lang, naunawaan naman ni Lord. No? Mabait naman ang Diyos natin, nauunawaan naman yan na ako'y busy. Ang ginagawa ko ay para sa pamilya ko. Ang ginagawa ko naman ay para sa Kanya. Saka na lang, no? Busy kasi ako eh. And we realize that in the end, one of our main greatest temptation or blocks not to follow God is basically our own daily routine. We have so many excuses, but in the end, we realize that we are not prioritizing important things in our life, especially the invitation of God. So, sisters and brothers, we need to evaluate our own priorities at this very moment. The gospel reading for today allows us to evaluate ourselves. Who's my priority? No? Who's my priority? Is God really my priority? I'm always expressing, I'm always telling, my lips will always say that God is my priority. But when I look at my action, when I look at my own daily activities that I am doing, I realize that God is not actually my priority. He was, or He is my priority here in my mouth, but not in my own action. We say that He's in our heart. But in the end, what's in our heart is basically earthly things that we are desiring every day. So, check your priority. When you say that this is my priority, is it really can be seen or manifested in our own action? So that's the question of our gospel reading for today, because in the end, there is an invitation, but the King will also require us certain action to the invitation. So, 4 points for consideration in your prayer for today. The first one is the realization that the initiative is basically from God. Second, the invitation of God to commune with Him deserves an action or requires an action. The third is, we have so many lame excuses to say no to God's invitation to commune with Him. And number 4, we realize in our gospel reading for today the necessary requirement of certain garment that we need to wear when we come to the Lord. So those are the 4 points for consideration. Let's go to the first one. The initiative comes from God. In this beautiful gospel, my sisters and brothers, it was actually the Lord who initiated everything. Now take note, during the time of Jesus, when someone will host a party or a banquet, there are 2 invitations. Okay? The first invitation is the invitation to come. And of course, when there's an invitation to come, people will say, I will come, I will come, I will come. And so, the hosts or the servants will count the number of people who said yes. And then let's say 100 people. And so therefore, if there are 100 people, I'm going to spend food or prepare food for 100 people. Because 100 people said yes. Just imagine. So that's the first invitation. So then the gospel said, now you may call those who were invited to come now because the food is already prepared. Now, here comes the 100 people. Ay, sorry na lang. Hindi pala ako pwede ngayong araw na ito. I said yes, oo, pero kailangan kong tapusin yung ginagawa ko sa bahay. May lalaban pa ako eh. Meron pa akong dapat gawin. Maglilinis pa ako. Hindi pa pala ako nakakapaglinis ng bahay. Eh, kailangan kong pumunta sa, kailangan mong trabaho eh. But you said yes. Oo nga, pero hindi talaga pwede eh. You know, sisters and brothers, this is also something that we need to consider. That when we decided to become a disciple or a baptized Christian, we're actually saying yes to the invitation. But when the Lord will say, come, let's join in my own ministry, let's help other people, or join me, commune with me in your own prayer, let's unite, let's commune. I want you to know and experience my joy of my loving presence, and then you say, no, hindi talaga pwede kasi busy pala ako eh. Just imagine the food that was already prepared, it will be wasted. Just imagine also when you say no, you are actually dishonoring the host because you said yes and then now you're saying no, as if you are also saying that the host or God is actually not your priority because there are other less concerns which is your priority. That's why the king can be really understood when he decided to destroy all these people who said yes and then said no. That's why they say that when the city of Jerusalem was totally destroyed, it was actually the king's wrath. This is how some Bible scholars will interpret our gospel reading for today. So my sisters and brothers, the initiative is actually coming from God. Our God is very generous. Graces are given free. But the question is, do I know how to respond to this God's invitation? Because God is very generous, the initiative comes from Him. That's why we come to the second point, which is, if there's an invitation, such invitation requires an action. So, if God will say, I prepared something for you, you cannot say, you said yes na. Where's your commitment? Now, suddenly you will say, no. It requires certain action. Okay, I said yes. I am committed to your invitation. Now you're calling me now to certain action. I'm going to say yes. This is also something for our own consideration, my sisters and brothers, to check also our realization of our commitment to say when we said yes. Are your yes remains yes? Are your yes suddenly became no? Are your yes remain yes and yet there's no action? The Lord is not like it. Sisters and brothers, always be reminded that when the Lord invites us to commune with Him, enjoy His loving presence, it is not for Him. He does not need the banquet. He possesses everything. It is not for him. It is actually basically for us when God invites us to enjoy the fullness of life. It's not for him, but for us. So when we say certain action will be required, it is basically for our own profit also. So when we say yes to God's salvific action, it is not for God's glory, but it is actually for our salvation. So ask yourself, there's an invitation, where's your action? Number 3, we realize also that in the end, my sisters and brothers, we need to check also our excuses when we say no to the Lord. Unfortunately, we realize that most of the time, our excuses are lame. They are not good excuses. Most of our excuses when we say, Lord, sandali lang muna, or Lord, sorry, no, we realize that those excuses are not good enough to validate our saying no. Come to think of it, sisters and brothers. Marami po sa ating mga excuses, hindi naman po talaga tunay na karapat-dapat na dahilan para umayaw sa tawag ng Diyos na makapiling siya sa ating dasal. I can feel, my sisters and brothers, that when the Lord invites us to a banquet, there are many possibilities of this banquet. It may mean also the invitation to attend an online mass or the Eucharistic celebration. Or it may also be an invitation for us to go to our daily prayer. That's a banquet because we share God's loving presence. And it is also a banquet when we say, let's go to the mission and help other people. So many invitations, so many banquets. But the question is, we have so many lame excuses every time God will allow us, every time God will invite us to a certain banquet. Number 4, some people will say, yes, Lord. No? I will say, yes, Lord, I am a Christian. Yes, Lord, I am a disciple. No? But unfortunately, sisters and brothers, there's a certain necessary garment that we need to wear when we go to the party or a banquet. If it is a children's party, of course, you can be as informal as you wish. But when you are going to a very formal party in Manila Hotel, you cannot wear a short and also a t-shirt. You're out of place. This is also what God is telling us in this gospel reading. Because the gospel said, when the Lord said, okay, they don't want to come, no problem with me. Let's invite everyone. So, open for everyone. And everybody came, including the bad and the good according to gospel reading. But unfortunately, even if God is generous, certain justice or requirement is necessary to honor the host. Just imagine, birthday, let's say birthday ng friend, birthday party, Manila Hotel gaganapin. Nagsuot ka lang ng shorts at t-shirt. You're actually insulting not only the party, but you're insulting the host. Di po ba? Di ba ang ipinapahiya mo yung may birthday o yung host? Sabi, ano ka ba naman? Hindi mo na ako kinahiya. Di ba? Hindi yung party ang ipinapahiya mo eh. O yung sarili mo, mas ipinapahiya mo yung host. Kasi ang pagsusuot ng tamang damit sa party o yung attire ay pagrespeto sa mismong nag-invite. God is inviting you to join in His discipleship, in His mission. Pero, anong suot mo? So, what is this required garment that the gospel reading is telling us, my sisters and brothers? This is basically the garment of humility, the garment of forgiveness, the garment of righteousness, holiness, courage, faith, depende. Kasi sa bangkete ng ating Panginoon, mayroong iba't ibang uri ng party. Kaya dapat kong tanungin ang sarili ko, anong uri ng party ito at doon ko isusuot ang tamang damit. In other words, if I realize, my sisters and brothers, na yung party na pupuntahan ko is a party of people who are actually disunited, no? Nag-aaway ang mga taong ito. So, what's the right dress? I'm going to wear the garment of understanding, the garment of forgiveness, the garment of patience, the garment of listening. Something like that. If I'm talking to a certain person, and this person is begging for forgiveness, I need to wear also the garment of forgiveness. If I realize that this person is in total misery, punong-puno ng takot, I'm going to wear the garment of love and compassion to help this person. If I realize that the party that I'm going to go is people who are all hungry, and so I need to wear the garment of self-sacrifice and giving. So, depende po sa party na pupuntahan natin. Those are basically the garment. But in the end, to summarize everything, this garment is the garment of righteousness or holiness. Do we have such garment? Because in the end, my sisters and brothers, when all of us will go to heaven, you cannot just go to heaven without any good or right garment. Because even heaven will demand a certain garment. And what is the garment when you go to heaven? The garment of holiness. Do we have such garment of holiness? And where will this holiness will come? From our own daily decision to love God and to serve people with all our hearts and minds. This is something for our own consideration. So there is a banquet. God is very generous. Everybody is being invited. The feast is already ready. The feast in heaven is already ready. But the question is, am I ready to say yes every day in my own life? That I can easily or can set aside any of my own earthly concerns and issues or works or daily routine when God will call me to do extra other things that needs our attention or God's attention? For your own consideration. So in the end, again, we repeat, we recognize that everything will always be in the context that God's initiative, that the initiative will always come from God first. And then we realize also that in the end, the invitation of God to come to Him requires an action. And the good action is yes. And we realize also that we need to check also our own excuses because most of the time we have so many lame excuses in serving God. And the last point is make sure that when we are in front of God, we are wearing the right garment. Because we don't want to be cast away by the King for our own failure to fulfill the right attire in any of His banquet.